Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Data Dispatch. I hope you guys have all had a wonderful day. We are still continuing to see some volatility and some uncertainty that's being brought into the market, especially with recent statements by the administration, what the current geopolitical tensions are regarding America and China. However, the market's been relatively resilient. We're seeing a little bit of some choppiness and weakness across the board, but it's not like I'm going all cash yet. I'm still just kind of holding, of course, the long-term positions and just making sure not to be too overexposed, especially kind of as this whole China thing is going to sort itself out over the next few weeks. We'll probably have lots of headlines that will need to be digested. Other than that, Palantir holding relatively strong. We'll be talking about how crypto's doing, especially with BMNR. A really important clip that I really like that Saylor comes out regarding Tom Lee and why I'm bullish on Tom Lee, and kind of the whole reason that I've kind of re-entered back into that space. So if you're a new or returning viewer, hit that like button, subscribe for daily videos. Thank you guys so much for helping out on the channel, and to all the channel members, thank you very much. Pop it up on the screen here. Palantir closes right here at 179.62. Not a ton of headlines or catalysts or anything coming out like that for Palantir. We do know earnings is coming out here in a few weeks now, like 2 to 3 weeks basically. So as Palantir will be gearing up for that, we could expect some volatility, of course, with earnings popping up. But other than that, in terms of catalyst or the macroeconomic structure, in terms of trading sideways right now, it's just kind of doing its thing. It's building its base out, and especially, Palantir, if it can build its base out and continue to build this consolidation kind of support foundational area around these all-time highs, that's pretty incredible. Palantir, that we've seen with the recent kind of selling pressure days, has had a lot of support that has been created around that 170 and has resistance basically kind of at the higher 180s and near these all-time highs. Still personally, I still think $200 is possibly on the table, depending on some variables in the market, especially with this. We'll talk about this in just a second. But in the overnight hours, up about 18 cents, you see this basically consolidating. So not a ton of trading action right here on Palantir, but continuing to do well. I like it right here. Sometimes doing nothing is pretty good because it's building a nice base for that next possible breakout, kind of cooling off every time it does gap up. That's what I like about Palantir. In terms of the big things that are happening, you got Trump here coming out saying that the U.S. is in a trade war with China. Oh no, we don't like those words. However, the futures actually are not reacting as negatively as I was personally expecting. And that could be because maybe some of this is already priced in from the initial threat that we saw, of course, on that last Friday with 100% tariffs and things like that. You have the whole soybean thing that's popping, that came out yesterday that we talked about. So we're going to see a lot of headlines that come out, and I think maybe the market's starting to absorb some of this, look past some of it slightly, and just waiting for these two guys to come to a deal. I think once these two guys come to a deal, that's where we're going to see a lot of optimism that gets reintroduced to the market. So if this is our cool off period, or if we could potentially have more, definitely, especially with the uncertainty, there could be more, especially with a political leader right now that we don't know. He could say anything that could really cause a lot of volatility in the market. But I do like how the market is holding up. So that's why personally, I'm still kind of keeping a bullish outlook, even if we had a little bit of a pullback or had like another big Friday selling pressure that we had last week. But the market was lower, opened up decently lower, and kind of closed up here, and especially towards the end of the session at 66.71 for the S&P 500 index, up about 0.4%. So it did fairly well. There's a lot of sideways consolidation between 66 and 6,700 for the S&P. So currently where it sits at right now, and currently where the SPY is, it's up 8 cents. So no big moves to really write home about, but it shows you here that it's kind of consolidating, holding support. So this is kind of being absorbed as we speak. Stock futures being a little changed. I like that. One good thing that we do have are earnings that are starting to roll out have been relatively bullish. And we saw that from the banks, that they all had great earnings. And I think as long as earnings remain strong, as long as the forecast for earnings remain strong, that's where you're going to continue to see resiliency in the market. In the after hours trading, you can see here, JB Hunt, their shares jumped more than 11%. And the company beat Wall Street earnings and revenue expectations, and Salesforce rose about 3% here after giving a very strong forecast. What you're seeing here, United Airlines, so it dipped about 2% after the airline's revenue disappointed, so maybe nobody's flying with them as much. But nonetheless, of course, you're going to see the Russell 2000 slightly below here of small cap stocks, broke out to a new high. Reason why Russell 2000 index, IWM, is probably doing relatively good is because we have quantitative easing that's happening. Kind of the tightening cycle is coming to an end, especially from the remarks that we've seen from the Fed. Still expecting about 2 more 25 basis point cuts for a total of 50 basis point cuts by the end of the year. I think that's still definitely on the table, especially during this whole governmental shutdown thing. And now you're going to have the whole threatening of China with a cooking oil trade ban. I mean, so we'll see what happens there in terms of the, if it's going to be a taco type movement. But what I do like in just the numbers, speaking of the numbers, is a lot of the buying the dip is occurring. And if the buying the dip is there, then hey, I'm still going to maintain with a relatively bullish outlook towards the end of the year. Of course, it's always subject to change with any type of headlines that we could get. Let's talk about BMNR. Let's listen to this quick clip that I really like from Michael Saylor that he talks about here of Tom Lee bringing Ethereum credibility.
It's emerged as probably the most visible, influential spokesperson in the entire Ethereum ecosystem in a matter of months, maybe a matter of weeks. What does that represent? Well, first of all, they have $10 billion of capital. Second of all, Tom Lee is part of the Wall Street establishment. He was never part of the crypto establishment. You saw Wall Street merges with the crypto economy, capital flows because it trusts Tom Lee. And then the next thing you know, you have Tom Lee having conversations with the early Ethereum entrepreneurs, with the Vitaliks of the world, and the like. And what's interesting there is that entire movement becomes commercialized, institutionalized, legitimized, rationalized, becomes a bit older, a bit more credible.
Very well said by Saylor here, talking about Tom Lee, who is really a Wall Street guy, and a lot of Wall Street type of personalities trust him, and he brings a lot of credibility with him. And now that he's trying to integrate into crypto, are we going to see this domino effect that Saylor kind of mentions? The rationality of it, institutionalize it, and the commercialization of it in terms of building products on the Ethereum blockchain. And that's what really got me interested back into kind of crypto once Tom Lee had mentioned, hey, he wants to get involved. And that's what we saw with BMNR. Currently, it's at 53.68. We're seeing a lot of support here at that 53 level for BMNR in terms of a technical area. We saw actually a little bit of an intraday low here at 51.29. So for anybody that got entries there at 51.29, relatively decent. In terms of BMNR and how's it correlating with Ethereum, Ethereum has actually been kind of trading sideways and seeing a little bit of selling pressure. Popped up here to about that 4,200 and then dropped down here to about the high 39s, basically trying to hold support here at the 4,000, and it did a little bit, catching a slight bid at 4,022 right now. I think as long as Ethereum can hold this kind of 4,000 floor here, continue to build its base out, and that's where I'm going to maintain optimism towards the end of the year, as everybody's expecting, of course, this big rally. The question is just when is it going to happen? I think more patience is going to be a bigger reward than people that are trying to bet on it for happening tomorrow. So, I mean, we'll see what happens with Ethereum, and it's a whole interesting point. Of course, there's a lot of volatility and speculations behind it, a lot of speculation. So it's a very volatile stock. If you can't handle the volatility, maybe it's not the best egg to put in your basket. Other than that, let's talk about HIMS here, a stock that's making a pretty big move. HIMS officially launches a actual HERS brand and launches products related to that. The HERS brand could be predicted to be bigger in HIMS. A lot of people, and I think Wall Street is kind of forgetting to try to take that into account. We all focus on the whole HIMS part of it, but what about the HERS part of it for him and HERS? And the potential market and the total addressable market there is quite astonishing. If HIMS, I don't have any personal exposure to this right now, but can keep executing, then it's going to get interesting in terms of its stock price. It grew about 16% of the day, currently at 61.74 in the overnight hours, popped up to about 64 from the intraday high, and we saw opening up here at $54. So up about 16% for people that have been bullish on HIMS, and there's been a lot of crazy things that have been happening with HIMS. Cool to see here that those long-term investors are finally being rewarded. other than that, it's all really about a half for you guys. What do you guys think about all this volatility here? More in terms of the macroeconomic structure. That's what I'm more importantly kind of prioritizing on top of not just the current individual stocks we've been talking about. It'll be interesting to see how that goes because that's going to cause a huge signal, in my own personal opinion, to the individual stocks that we mentioned in the channel. So peace out, take care, and I'll catch you guys later. Always, of course, be safe out there. It's easier to lose the money than to gain it.